He didn't just say he killed one woman, he said 13. And when investigators leaned forward and asked him to repeat it, he didn't hesitate. He didn't flinch. He didn't correct himself. He said the number again. 13 women, different cities, different years, different lives that never came home. For a moment, the room went quiet, because if what Mark Riebe was saying was true, then one of the most dangerous serial killers in Florida's history had been hiding in plain sight, and had already been locked away for a completely different murder. But here's the part that still haunts detectives to this day. Some of the details he gave weren't public. Not then. Not now. And that's where this story stops being simple and starts becoming disturbing. Because Mark Riebe was already serving a life sentence when he confessed. He had nothing to gain. No parole, no deal, no chance of freedom. So why confess at all? And more importantly, why did he later take it back? Before Mark Riebe was ever called a serial killer, before his name appeared in cold case files across Florida, he was just another man drifting through the Gulf Coast, invisible, unremarkable, forgettable, which is exactly how killers like to be remembered. In August of 1989, Pensacola, Florida was quiet in the way coastal towns usually are at night. The air was thick, streets empty, convenience stores glowing like islands of light. Donna Callahan was 29 years old, a mother, a daughter, someone who had people waiting for her to come home. She stopped at a convenience store late that night. She never made it back. Her car was found abandoned, her purse still inside, her keys still there. No sign of a struggle, no witnesses, just absence, the most terrifying clue of all. For years, Donna Callahan's disappearance went nowhere, until Mark Riebe. Riebe was arrested years later after witnesses placed him near Donna's car. There were inconsistencies in his statements. His timeline didn't hold. And when pressure mounted, the case finally moved forward. In 1998, Mark Riebe entered a no-contest plea to first-degree murder. Life in prison. Case closed. Except it wasn't. Because once Mark Riebe was locked behind bars, something changed. He started talking. At first it came in fragments, offhand remarks, strange comments during conversations with investigators, mentions of places, names, years. Then one day he said it plainly, "I killed more." When detectives asked how many, they weren't prepared for the answer. 13. Not maybe, not around. 13. He began listing names, women who had disappeared years earlier along the Florida Panhandle and nearby regions, women whose cases had gone cold, women whose families were still waiting for answers. And then came the details. Locations, methods, circumstances. Details that made detectives sit back in their chairs, because some of what he described had never been released publicly. That's the moment investigators faced a terrifying possibility. What if they had only caught him once? And what if the real story was far bigger? Among the names Mark Riebe mentioned were women whose disappearances had baffled law enforcement for decades. Bonnie Gail Ryther, missing since 1978. Jacqueline Jackie Brandt, vanished in 1986. Pamela June Ray. Rhonda Taylor. Women who disappeared near highways, convenience stores, beaches, places where no one would notice someone slipping away. Riebe didn't describe himself as a mastermind, he described opportunity. He said he picked women who were alone, vulnerable, unnoticed. And when detectives asked him how he remembered so many details after so many years, he gave an answer that chilled the room. You don't forget things like that. This is usually the part in a true crime story where everything becomes clear. But with Mark Riebe, clarity never comes. Because just as quickly as he confessed, he began to unravel his own story. Some investigators believed him immediately. Others were cautious. Confessions, especially from inmates serving life sentences, are dangerous things. Some are driven by attention, some by guilt, some by mental illness, some by nothing more than boredom. And then there was the biggest problem of all: evidence. In several of the cases, Riebe claimed responsibility for forensic testing, including DNA, did not support his involvement. In others, there simply wasn't enough left to test, which raised a question no one wanted to ask out loud. Was Mark Riebe exaggerating? Or was he telling the truth, and the evidence just wasn't there anymore? And then, without warning, Riebe did something that confused everyone. He recanted. He said he lied. He said he didn't kill those women. And just like that, the man who had confessed to 13 murders tried to erase his own confession. But here's the problem. You can't unring that bell, because by the time he recanted, detectives had already verified some of the details he provided, details that were never made public. So how did he know them? That question still has no answer. Mark Riebe didn't fit the profile people expect. He wasn't charismatic. He wasn't brilliant. He didn't seek fame. He drifted. He blended. He survived, which made him dangerous in a way most serial killers aren't. He wasn't memorable. He was forgettable. The kind of man you'd never look at twice. The kind of man whose name you wouldn't remember if someone asked you the next day. And that's exactly what makes this story so unsettling. Because if Mark Riebe really was responsible for even a fraction of what he claimed, then some of the most painful unsolved cases in Florida history were hiding in plain sight for years. And if he wasn't, then why confess at all? Why name real victims? Why provide real details? Why carry that weight when no one was asking you to? Some believe guilt finally broke him. Others believe he wanted control, one last way to manipulate investigators from behind bars. And then there are those who believe something darker, that he was telling the truth, and panicked when he realized how much attention he had drawn. Because here's something that rarely gets talked about. Once a serial killer confesses, investigators don't just listen. They dig. They reopen files. They compare timelines. They find patterns. And sometimes they uncover things the killer never intended to reveal. Mark Riebe may have realized that by talking, he had started something he could no longer control, so he pulled back. But by then, it was too late. Families had heard his name. Cold case units had reopened files, and the question of how many women were truly lost became impossible to ignore. To this day, Mark Riebe remains behind bars. Officially, he is only convicted of one murder. Unofficially, his shadow stretches across decades of unsolved disappearances, and the most disturbing part of all isn't what he said. It's what we still don't know. Because somewhere between his confession and his recantation lies the truth. And it's buried in missing evidence, fading memories, and lives that never got answers. Was Mark Riebe a liar seeking attention? Or was he one of the most under-recognized serial killers America ever imprisoned? He didn't just name victims, he placed himself inside their final moments. And that's where the story shifts from unsettling to dangerous. Because when investigators began pulling the files of the women Mark Riebe claimed he killed, they noticed something that couldn't be ignored. His timeline wasn't random, it wasn't scattered. It followed roads, highways, coastal routes, places a drifter could move through without leaving a trail. And Mark Riebe was a drifter. He worked odd jobs. He slept where he could. He moved often, sometimes voluntarily, sometimes because people didn't want him around, which meant something chilling. If he was telling the truth, then he didn't need to stalk victims for weeks. He didn't need elaborate plans. He only needed opportunity, and opportunity was everywhere. One of the first names investigators focused on was Bonnie Gail Ryther. She vanished in 1978 after being seen near a convenience store in Fort Walton Beach. No witnesses, no body, no arrests, just a sudden absence that swallowed her whole. When Riebe described Bonnie, he didn't just mention her name. He mentioned where she was standing, which side of the building, which direction she walked, details that were never released publicly. That alone didn't prove guilt, but it made detectives uneasy. Then there was Jacqueline "Jackie" Brandt. She disappeared in 1986 after leaving work in Panama City Beach. Her car was later found abandoned, again. No struggle, no noise, no closure. When Riebe spoke about Jackie, he described the weather that night, the humidity, the smell of the air, the way the streetlights reflected off the pavement. Those details mattered because they matched police records. Not perfectly, but close enough to make investigators pause. And this is where the story becomes complicated. Because for every detail that seemed accurate, there was another that didn't line up at all. In some cases, Riebe placed himself in cities where records suggested he might not have been. In others, his descriptions were vague, almost rehearsed. And then came the DNA. As forensic technology advanced, investigators tested what little evidence they still had in several cold cases. In at least a few of them, Mark Riebe was excluded. Not a match, not even close. That should have ended it, but it didn't, because not every case had evidence to test, and not every disappearance left behind something measurable. Some women were never found. Some cases were mishandled decades earlier. Some evidence was lost. And in those gaps, those empty spaces where proof should have been, Mark Riebe's confession still lingered. This is the part people struggle with, because the human mind wants certainty. Either he did it or he didn't, but the truth doesn't always offer that comfort. Mark Riebe existed in a gray zone, one where guilt and deception overlapped. And then there were the interviews. When journalists and investigators sat across from him, they noticed something strange. He didn't boast, he didn't dramatize, he didn't describe himself as powerful or brilliant. If anything, he downplayed himself, which made some people believe him more, but others saw something else. Control. Because when you confess to something that large, something that shakes decades of unsolved cases, you control the narrative. You decide what gets talked about, you decide what stays buried, and you decide when the conversation ends. And Mark Riebe ended it abruptly. One day he said it wasn't true. He said he lied. No buildup, no explanation that made sense, just a flat denial. Investigators asked why. His answers changed. Sometimes he said he was pressured. Sometimes he said he was confused. Sometimes he said he wanted attention. But none of those explanations fully explained one thing: the details. How did he know them? That question has never been answered. Some detectives believe he inserted himself into cases he'd read about, heard about, or absorbed over time. Others believe he committed some of the murders, but not all. And a few believe something even more disturbing: that he confessed to the ones he could remember, and recanted when he realized how much scrutiny was coming. Because once investigators reopen cases, they don't just look at the suspect. They look at everyone around him: associates, witnesses, timelines, patterns. And if Mark Riebe was involved in even a handful of those cases, the deeper investigation could have exposed more than he was ready to face. So he pulled back. He shut down. He stopped talking. And the truth froze in place. Families were left in limbo. Some believed him. Some rejected him entirely. Some didn't care who did it. They just wanted answers. And that's the cruelest part of this story, because uncertainty doesn't just haunt investigators. It haunts the families who never got to bury their daughters, never got to say goodbye, never got to know what really happened on those final nights. Mark Riebe will likely die in prison, officially remembered as a man convicted of one murder, unofficially remembered as something far more ambiguous, a man who may have been responsible for far more than the justice system could ever prove, or a man who weaponized confession itself, knowing that once he spoke, the damage could never be undone. And that's why this story still matters, because somewhere between his confession and his denial lies a truth that no one has been able to fully uncover. And whether Mark Riebe was a serial killer, a liar, or something in between, the unanswered questions remain. How many women were taken by someone who was never caught? How many cases were connected but never proven? And how many truths died with the people who could no longer speak for themselves? That's the part no confession can erase. And it's why, even now, decades later, Mark Riebe's name still echoes through cold case files, not as an answer, but as a question. And here's something that almost never gets discussed. Serial killers don't always confess because they want forgiveness. Sometimes they confess because they want to be remembered. Mark Riebe knew something most people don't think about: that prison erases men. Years pass, faces fade, names disappear into paperwork and silence. For most inmates, the world eventually forgets they ever existed. But confessions change that. A confession rewrites your identity. Suddenly, you're not just an inmate. You're a mystery, a headline, a subject of debate, a name whispered in true crime circles decades later. And Mark Riebe understood that power. When he confessed to killing 13 women, he didn't just reopen cases, he reopened wounds. He inserted himself into lives that had already been shattered once. And when he recanted, he left those wounds open. Because a denial doesn't restore peace. It replaces certainty with doubt. Investigators who worked the case still disagree among themselves. Some quietly believe Riebe was responsible for multiple murders, just not all 13. Others believe he was a manipulator who studied cases, absorbed details, and stitched together a story convincing enough to shake an entire region. And then there are those who believe the truth is split down the middle, that Mark Riebe killed more than one woman, but far fewer than he claimed, that he confessed broadly to hide specificity. Because when you confess to everything, you're accountable for nothing. And that theory raises an unsettling possibility. What if some of the women he named weren't his victims at all, but cover? What if by confessing to 13, he blurred the trail so thoroughly that the truth could never be isolated again? That possibility alone has kept cold case investigators awake at night. Because the danger of a false confession isn't just that it misleads police. It contaminates the truth permanently. Once a name is attached to a case, every future lead is viewed through that lens. Every suspect is compared to that story. Every theory bends around it. And if that confession is false, even partially, justice becomes almost impossible. But then, there's the other possibility, the one no one likes to sit with for too long. That Mark Riebe was telling the truth, that he moved through Florida for years, unnoticed, unremarkable, drifting from place to place, leaving behind nothing but unanswered questions, that he blended in because no one was looking, and that when he finally spoke, it wasn't to brag. It was to unload something he could no longer carry. If that's true, then some of the women he named didn't just lose their lives, they lost their justice. Because evidence fades, witnesses die, memories blur, and confessions without proof die quietly inside filing cabinets. That's the cruel arithmetic of time, and it's why this story refuses to end. Because whether Mark Riebe was a serial killer or a liar, the damage is real either way. Real families, real missing daughters, real nights where someone waited for a phone call that never came, and a man who may have held the answers chose not to give them cleanly. So where does that leave us? It leaves us with a man officially convicted of one murder, unofficially tied to many, and permanently suspended in uncertainty. It leaves us with cold cases that may never be solved, not because the truth isn't there, but because it arrived too late, too tangled, and too compromised. And it leaves us with one final question that no interview, no confession, and no denial has ever answered. When Mark Riebe looked across that table and said he killed 13 women, was he lying to be remembered? Or was he telling the truth and trusting that time would protect him? Because if even one of those confessions was real, then someone out there waited their entire life for justice and never got it. And that may be the most disturbing part of this story. Not what Mark Riebe said, but what he took with him into silence.